when you go to mass or church on a Sunday, some of you may go to a parish hall afterwards or have a cup of tea or something. It's becoming increasingly rare and something maybe the older generation do more than the younger. But if I was to show you a film and stick on a cheery film about eliminating the undesirable members of society, such as the disabled or disabled, I think you'd probably think I was, well, ever so slightly touched in the head. Now, there was such a group, however, who did do that, and they're a group that's had more influence than you'd like to think in society. But before I get to them, this is a film called Erbkrank from 1936. It's a rather disturbing film on what was called racial hygiene by the Nazis, and it's not very pleasant. I've chosen not to show the sound on it. This educational film on racial hygiene shows a mental and physically disabled with intermittent text describing what a waste of money it is to care for them. This was one of 6 films produced by Walter Gross's Office for Racial Policy. And given the era it was produced in, I think you can guess what happened to the poor people in this video. And we'll come back to that in about 2 to 3 minutes. We're only going to watch a couple of minutes of this because it's not a very pleasant video, but we will watch that much of it. I noticed that much of it's actually on YouTube in other forms, so I imagine we can get away with that much. There it is, lecturing about the sort of unneeded people in society, etc., from Dr. Gross, etc., on and on and on, and how they use up too much gold. I'm not going to try and translate all the German. My German wouldn't be up to it anyway. Now, I'm sure there must be some people out there watching that have relatives who are disabled, elderly, have Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, and numerous other conditions. I'm sure, of course, you view them as totally useless and are just about to, now as a result of this charmingly lovely piece, get rid of them. No, what's that? You're not? You think this is a disgusting video? Quite right, it is. It's a disgusting and inhumane piece of work that devalues and dehumanizes people. And if you think so, I'm glad to agree with you, because I think you were, well, slightly mad otherwise. I think you were slightly insane. But that unfortunately led to the wonderful T4 program, which was called thus, and I'll read out the following from this site, the Jewish Virtual Library. In the fall of 1939, the German government, under the Reich Chancellery, established the euthanasia program directed by Philip Bullier and Dr. Karl Brandt. The headquarters of the operation were at Tiergartenstrasse 4 Berlin, which is where the T4 comes from. The choice of terminology for the program is consistent with the Nazis' penchant for euphemism. Euthanasia simply means mercy killing, and in the 1990s in the United States and other Western nations, it was synonymous with physician-assisted suicide. You could have moral arguments about that even in the modern world, but compared to the T4 program under the Third Reich, well, go and look it up. Hundreds of thousands of people off because they were disabled or had developmental delays or considered to be useless eaters to society. And once we start having people deciding people's existence in those utilitarian manner, it never stops because people will find newer and newer ways to do it. Robert G. Lifton makes the following assessment of the number of people killed in the T4 and similar projects. The following statistics are usually given. Adult mental patients from institutions, 80,000 to 100,000. Children's in institutions, 5,000. Special action against Jews in institution. Concentration camp inmates transported to killing centres, 20,000. Clee estimated that at the end of 1941, some 93,521 beds had been emptied for other uses. 70,000 patients gassed, plus over 20,000 dead through starvation and medications. In other words, approximately 1/3 of the place for the mentally ill. But these figures may well be low, too low. Twice these number of people may have perished. The fact is we do not know, and we shall probably never know. Elements of deception, imposed chaos, and the destruction of many records make anything like an accurate assessment impossible. And you're asking what this has to do with today's world and why I'm going on about it at this point. Here's why. This is the Pioneer Fund, and the Pioneer Fund was founded in the 1930s to promote shall we say, purity of race. And one of its goals was to do this by showing movies like Herb Crank in churches and schools. That's why I started with that bizarre and strange idea of popping down to a church hall to see a Nazi propaganda film, because they actually did it. And if you think the Pioneer Fund is a dead organization because the Nazis are long gone, think again. Notice here, the Pioneer Fund was headed by psychology professor J. Philip Rushton. He was succeeded by Richard Lynn, and Richard Lynn only died a couple of years ago. And the Pioneer Fund was also linked to a certain other book and many of its members, the Bell Curve. And the Bell Curve has obtained a certain resurgence yet again in raced realists, and I use the term laughingly, circles. And the Bell Curve is something like a large piece of fecal matter that keeps popping up to the top of your toilet, and which, no matter how many plumbers you call in, you can never push it down. Even if you get in Mario and Luigi, they couldn't get that down there. It's just not possible. It seems to just keep springing up in a most unpleasant way indeed. But what's very strange about it is at the minute there seems to be an intersection of people who are pushing the bell curve and who are Zionist. The intersection seems to me to be absolutely bizarre, because the Pioneer Fund was, of course, rabidly anti-Semitic and rabidly in favor of the Holocaust, and yet many of the modern proponents of stuff like the bell curve and stuff around it seem to have somehow managed to combine that and a liking for that with Zionism and seem to put the two together. Now, I'm not sure how this works, this kind of cognitive dissonance. I'd love someone to explain it to me, how you can support organizations like the Pioneer Fund who are connected to the bell curve, and the Pioneer Fund that reinvented itself, as we'll see in a minute. Wait for it. Wait for the penny to drop in a minute, and it's a very big penny. And how you can combine your support for that, and how you can combine both points of views. But the Pioneer Fund then became the Human Diversity Foundation, which was founded by a certain Mr. Andrew Connery, who then founded people to write all sorts of strange racist stuff and racist diatribes all over the place. So don't imagine this stuff is all just in the past and has no bearing on your life. All of this stuff is still bouncing around out there and has a current impact on us. And these strange ideological currents where the people who supported the Pioneer Fund, who are now managing to support Zionism and cheer for that, and yet, had they been alive 80 years ago, would they be cheering for the Holocaust? I think so, probably. For them, human beings seem to be disposable entities if they are not of the pure race. That seems to be their view of humanity.